Ladies and gentlemen of the interwebs, we have entered a realm of reality where satire and seriousness are indistinguishable. Where if you do not know your interlocutor, you might not know that he is in fact delivering the best deadpan satirical parody of all time. Mr. Gad Sad, author of such books as The Parasitic Mind and Happiness, creator of the term known as suicidal empathy, put out a video that was so convincing, people actually thought it was serious. Behold.
I just found out of the terror attack of two National Guards in DC by Rahmanullah Lakanwal from Afghanistan. And as I think of this tragedy, I can't help but worry that this is now going to marginalize the Muslim community and lead to more Islamophobia. So the guy who was granted entry into the US in 2021 so that he could live a better life here ends up shooting two people. And my big concern is that there's now going to be increased Islamophobia. So I suggest that we increase immigration from Islamic countries to show that we're not going to let the terrorists win. I just found out.
The problem is this. It's you feel almost dirty saying that this is funny. That we live in a world where if you don't know who Gad Sad is, and this is your first time seeing him, you're going to think, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Now, if you've been around the world long enough, you also know that pretty much systematically in the wake of terror attacks, wherever they occur, you invariably have people saying, the community of the perpetrator is going to fear backlash, invariably. And it's the suicidal empathy that Gad Sad coined as a term. Some people didn't know who Gad Sad was, and they thought this was serious. And so the hilarious thing is Alex Jones retweets Shadow of Ezra that tweeted the original video saying, is this guy for real? And Alex puts up a tweet and says, is this a joke? And I say, yeah, Alex, if you're not familiar with Gad Sad's work, he's notorious for deadpan satire. And then this person, I'm not trying to pick fun of this person, nobody knows that he's being satirical. They say they deleted the video, but it's also here. This is Gad Sad. He is highlighting the absurdity of the progressive movement. He's highlighting the insanity of the suicidal empathy that will potentially, God willing it won't, be the downfall of the Western world. This is the video that he put out as part and parcel of his longer videos. He does great rants on his own YouTube channel, Gad Sad. And people who were unfamiliar with him thought he was being serious because we live in a world where people will actually respond like that. So just to get that out in the open, yes, it was satire, and Alex Jones actually invited Gad on to InfoWars, and that should be an amazing thing to watch. But we live in a world where you cannot distinguish between the people making fun of the abject insanity of the idiots and the seriousness of the insanity of the idiots. So this is the story that has been in the news now for the last couple of days, and as more details come out, more questions come out. Brianna Morello put out a tweet, and it brought back memories. Like you can only make sense of this in back motion with the new additional information that we're getting in real time. Brianna put out a tweet and said, it's September 2021. A female U.S. service member was assaulted by a group of Afghan refugees, quote, on a military base. The Pentagon has referred me to the FBI. The FBI, under both administrations, has refused to tell me if the suspects were arrested or deported. The FBI wouldn't answer my email when I asked their media team directly. Maybe you have to tag FBI_rapid response, Brianna. Bada bing, bada boom. Satire. They told me to fill out a Freedom of Information access request. We've sent several FOIAs, and we keep getting blocked from obtaining any information on the status of the investigation. Now, for those of you who may or may not recall this incident, it was only very much in the periphery of the backdrop of my memories because the world is batshit insane, and you hear something like this at the time, and then you move on, not out of neglect, just with the speed of the news cycle and with the ability to, you can only learn so much more information before it pushes something else out of your head. This is the article from the time. James R. Webb. What year was this? Yeah, September 27, 2021. FBI investigating reported assault of female Fort Bliss soldier by Afghan refugees. Officers at Fort Bliss, Monday, confirmed that the FBI is investigating the alleged assault of a female soldier at Fort Bliss, Texas, by Afghan refugees. The date's kind of important. We're in September 2021. This is in the preliminary stages of the Biden tyranny, the Biden weaponization of all aspects of government. So we're in the beginning of A, weaponization, B, destruction of America, and C, the suppression of the victims of the policy of the administration. The investigation is currently working with the FBI and have since provided acknowledgement that they received the case from Fort Bliss. Lieutenant Colonel Ali Payne. My goodness, it's almost like satire is writing itself. 1st Armored Division spokeswoman in a statement emailed to the Military Times. According to Payne, the incident occurred on September 19 when a, quote, small group of male evacuees at the Donna Ana complex in New Mexico allegedly assaulted a female service member. While Payne declined to comment on specific details of the assault, she did say the soldier received medical care and counseling in the wake of the attack. Oh, that's so nice. I mean, they really take care of their service members after they get allegedly sexually assaulted by a group of Afghan refugees. Well, they gave her some medical treatment and here's some counseling. So you've been sexually assaulted by a group of Afghans. I can picture the pamphlet. It's like something straight out of The Simpsons. Payne told Military Times that the installation took an in-depth review of protocols after the report was made. Well, yeah, we got to go make sure that we don't leave people unattended to get sexually assaulted by the people who don't know what they're doing there. We're going to get to that in a second because Kyle Serafin's going to come on because apparently he replied to Brianna's tweet and said, I have some firsthand knowledge of this. And I'm like, hey, Kyle, you want to come on and talk about this right after I give everyone the rundown of the article. Since that date, we reiterated the established buddy system. You're governed by idiots. You're governed by idiots. It's like we had a buddy system when we were swimming at our lakes in camp, YCC, back in Canada. Your buddy, call them. And then every now and again, somebody wouldn't call their number back and they had to evacuate the entire pool. You have a buddy system. This is military level stuff going on right now. Installed security cameras, because why? Who would have thought that would have been a solution? Increased lighting increased our health and safety patrols in the village. Fort Bliss is one of 8 military installations in the U.S. expected to house about 50,000 Afghan refugees evacuated from Afghanistan during the U.S. withdrawal. Last week, according to The Hill, an Afghan refugee being housed at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, was charged criminally for attempting to engage in a sexual act with a minor. Hey, fast forward 5 years. Who would have thought that this could have possibly happened? So that was the story at the time. Brianna, because of the news now of an Afghan refugee who was brought in, I think, at the same time as this, reiterating some requests for transparency and not getting them. And it's not the first time. Look, I've now thoroughly got my theory as to what the hell's going on at the FBI under the DOJ. You can call me biased and whatever you want. When I saw the picture of Kash Patel, walking the streets of DC after that with his entourage. And you get the impression that this is a man who, prior to joining, was talking about dismantling the FBI. And maybe I'm reading too much into what I remember him having said. When you have Kash Patel praising an institution that many of us believe is irremediably corrupt, it almost feels like someone is starstruck and now sort of placing undue faith in an institution that is irremediably corrupt. You're under the DOJ. So even if Kash wanted to go hog wild, I don't know that he could, because you're under the DOJ of Pam Bondi, who I think before the Epstein debacle ought to have been fired and replaced. And we have heard reports from Tom Fitton saying we're not getting unredacted documents of Biden-era stuff when we submit FOIA requests. I'm fairly certain it was to the FBI, if I'm not making a mistake. And it's not good. And so we're going to find out what the heck is going on about this. And we've got Kyle's going to bring up some interesting footage. Kyle Serafin has now been on the channel many, many times. Kyle, sir, I was going to say now a friend of the channel, but I don't want to make enemies with other people I consider to be I should say ED. I'm talking about the Julie Kelly debacle, but
God forbid.
She hasn't blocked me yet, but I think she unfollowed me.
It's pending. Yeah, don't worry. You got a short window. It'll happen.
Kyle, sir, how goes the battle?
Today is a better day than many, so it goes, but it feels like we're winning a little bit.
Okay, so look, you replied to Brianna Morello and you said I could have given you some personal info on this because you were involved in the investigation or you were there at the time when this happened. What was your involvement in this?
Yeah, so this fell into the Fort Bliss, the Doniana complex was where they housed all these Afghans. We had roughly 10,000 being stored there. There were another 10,000 at Holloman Air Force Base. Both of them fell within the AOR of two different offices because that military base kind of falls and climbs into New Mexico on the southern end in Las Cruces, where I was based out of. And then there was also the El Paso field office. So we both had access to these Afghan populations. And so we kind of took joint duty, and we were asked to go and assist with the investigation down there into this female service member. So I went down there with my partner a couple times. We actually did regular rotations down there where we were what was called the duty agent, which meant, which sounds like you're dealing with poop, which is actually what we dealt with. Quick little kind of understanding for people. This in every way, shape, or form felt like a third world area. The joke that we had is, if you guys have never been to Las Cruces and far west Texas, it looks a lot like Afghanistan. There's an elevation differential from the rest of Texas, and it's beginning of the Rocky Mountains. So you have 5,000 feet of elevation was base. You have 8,000, 9,000 foot mountains in the Oregon Mountain Range and some of the others that are out that way. So there's mountains in the background. You're in this dusty kind of desert environment. And the guys that had spent a bunch of time deployed to Afghanistan said it must have looked like a joke. They put these poor guys on a plane. They flew them to Qatar. They flew them to Germany, Ramstein Air Force Base, and then flew them into the United States and then landed either at Holloman or ended at Fort Bliss. And then they thought they were back in Afghanistan because it looks like Afghanistan. So it's very crappy. It's dusty. They're out in tents on a military base. And we're talking about people who had every level of sophistication and none. So some people grew up, spoke multiple languages, were professional computer programmers. We interviewed guys during this investigation who had worked for the State Department, held a security clearance with the US government or some version thereof, a position of trust. They had access to our embassy, and they were likely to go make really decent money, as a diversity hire that actually had capabilities going off to like Amazon. And then we also dealt with people who walked off with their buddy, another male, holding hands into the desert 50 feet off the road, dropped trow, and took craps on the side of the military base.
You got to explain this. I feel like an idiot for not even having an idea as to the answer. Seriously, what the hell are they doing there? How long are they on the facilities for? What is the process when they bring in, whether it's 10,000, 50,000? What are they doing there? What do they do during the day? And what's the end goal with them?
There was no end goal. It was an absolute shit show. There's no other way to say it. It was and this was part of the whistleblower disclosure that I made to my member of Congress. And this specific story that we're going to be talking about actually was something that I brought up with my member of Congress. Actually, I think they asked me. They go, listen, we've been asking the FBI, we've been asking the State Department, we've asked CIA, we've asked every single entity that could be involved, DOD, Department of Army specifically, Air Force. Can someone please tell us what's going on with this female service member? And they were getting zero answers. So not only did Brianna not get any answers, nobody got answers, to include Congress members who were trying to get something to understand whether or not they needed to be making advocacy.
But even before the assault on the female officer, what are they just creating indefinite encampments of Afghan refugees that will be indefinitely enclosed in the middle of the New Mexico desert to just twiddle their thumbs and get into trouble on the facility all day?
It's actually way worse than that. I don't know what the end goal plan was, and the Army handled it differently than the Air Force, which you can imagine. So the Air Force actually had much nicer tents, and things were a little bit more structured and organized. The Army was a lot dustier and a little bit more like, I think they had a higher volume of people. It's just the way that the different forces handle it. First of all, they were not actually restricted to that camp, and that's the thing that I wanted people to understand. And I brought to my member of Congress. I said, you don't get it. We flew people directly from overseas. They got stuck in some sort of, Air Force or Army vetting process. And then they landed in the United States, and they were put down on these bases, and they were given a tent, and they were given a cot, and they were given clothing and food and laundry facilities and medicine. And then there was all this ridiculous smorgasbord of missionary groups coming in and immigrant NGO resettlement groups and all these other things. And the State Department was there. The freaking CIA was running around and trying to establish comms with what was going on back in Afghanistan. Because when Biden pulled our forces out and disrupted what was going on there and the Taliban took over, the entirety of the collection network that the United States government has spent basically 2 decades building to know what sort of threats were there and what sort of terrorist activities were going on, they were completely destroyed. I had friends that worked in the FBI's end of the intel gathering, and he spent the next, I want to say he spent the next year working insane hours, working overnight mostly, working on Afghan time, trying to evacuate the 150 plus sources that he had working inside Afghanistan. And about half of them didn't make it out, and we presume that they were killed along with their families. So it was this disaster. And so CIA's in there giving, money and laptops and tablets and phones and trying to get access to intel, both domestically and who's, in the bases and back home. And then you've got a bunch of people that just showed up for no reason because the planes were leaving and they got on them. And that was crazy. And the last worst part of it was they weren't required to stay on the base. The soldiers that were there did entry control points where they would restrict what travel could come on with vehicles. But if somebody wanted to walk, and they did by the dozens on every given day, they could just walk off the base to an open road or an open highway and call an Uber and disappear into the United States with no visa, no paperwork, no idea who the hell they were. They didn't get vetted in any meaningful way, to the point where during one of our sexual assault interviews, we're talking to this woman and she's got her ID, which, came from a base in Qatar, I think. And so she's showing the ID and we go, okay, so it says here, and we got an interpreter. She doesn't speak English. And it says here that you're 25 years old and you're from whatever province. And she goes, no, I'm 23. And when we said, well, your ID says you're 25 and you were born in this year. And she said, well, I wasn't. I'm actually 23. And we said, well, why does your ID say this? And she said, when I went to the desk where they were giving out IDs, which is how they got their IDs, by the way, no paperwork required. They asked me what year I was born and how old I was and where I was from. And when I told them, the lady said, no, you're too tall to be 23. You're probably 25. And so they wrote down 25 on the official paperwork that came into the United States. That's how rigorous the vetting process was overseas. So, it was completely made up. It was fabricated nonsense.
You did not kind of lose me. You did kind of actually blow my mind at the point where you say the Afghan refugees that have come in unvetted, they're staying at these encampments, could, and in your estimation, did in fact just walk out and disappear into the United States.
Dozens of them every day. We watched them. They would just leave. And we'd be like, where do those people go? And they're like, we don't know. And they didn't. And so look, you had to stick around. If you wanted to get parole, which is what they did, they gave them parole status, which was a State Department option. It's similar to like temporary protected status. You could get paroled into the United States, which would give you opportunities to work and other things. But you had to stick around and go through the vetting process that happened on the base. You had to go through the State Department paperwork and whatever it was. And you had to establish who your family members were, or where you were going to go, and who was going to, I don't know what all the process are because I'm not an Afghan, and it wasn't my purview, but I knew that they had to do that. And some people just decided they didn't care about that. They were just going to leave, and they did. And they could go and establish or connect with established networks of Afghans in the United States that were maybe, doing things and were totally reputable. And they also could have walked in and joined terror cells that were working under the radar that we didn't know were hanging out here. And all of that was absolutely terrifying as somebody who was, I was sent there to go look for people who were beating up women, and for, the person that may have been involved in, or the group of people that may have been involved in raping a U.S. soldier or sexually assaulting her. So we're doing that. We're doing what was called major crime, but there were regular fights and nonsense. They didn't do anything about it.
You're investigating major crime occurring on these encampments.
Right. Correct. And here's the thing, and here's why. So David, just so people understand, my full-time gig was to do the same thing on an Indian reservation called the Mescalero Apache Indian Reservation. So that's out near Ruidoso and in New Mexico. So I was used to doing that during that period of time. That was my job. And so I was a duty agent there for 1 week out of every 3. And we had a Bureau of Indian Affairs would handle it. And then during those off weeks, we were basically filling in and called like complaint type duty, where you're rolling in there and you're finding out the Army, police officers, the force protection guys there would go, here's what we've got. We've got an allegation to fill in the blank. We've got a minor that reports being sexually assaulted. We have this young man who we think is underage, but is like stuck with this group of military age males, and they're not letting anyone near him. And so we think he might be being periodically raped, and it was just weird stuff. They would bring it to you. This woman says that she was beat up by this man. She says she doesn't know him, but he says that it's his wife. And apparently people saw him grab her by the hair and say, now you're my wife. And then the elders beat the crap out of the guy. So we're investigating like a physical assault, like a gang beating. It was a complete shit show on every level. And there's no other way to say it. It was madness. And
Well,
that's why I shared you the video, just so people can kind of see what we're
well,
talking about.
can you bring it up?
Sure. Yeah, I think so.
Because
I've never done it in this one.
What's amazing is like you're creating this. There's no other way to describe it as something of a ghetto, and there's nothing to do there on a daily basis other than sit and wait for whatever paperwork. I mean, you can play kickball. I don't know how many kids are there, and so basically, there's nothing to do except twiddle your thumbs, get into trouble, and occasionally rape a service woman. And
that story's even worse.
And then you're
going to find out it's actually worse.
So play this video. I mean, this is. I say that it looks almost like that place in Arizona where they do the old westerns.
Yeah.
Except like hell on earth. I mean, this looks like nothing of America.
So there's no volume to this other than, I mean, you can hear the car driving, but this was filmed right out of my windshield, which I think there was some sort of policy about not using cameras or something like that. But we were the FBI doing like criminal investigations that we had no business being in. So I just wanted people to kind of see the dusty nonsense. There are, these are contracted ambulances that are doing emergency medicine, and who knows who the hell they are or where they came from. You've got the water towers up there. These are all hasty erected sort of temper tent style overseas dwellings. You've got some permanent buildings, but they just, they threw up fencing. They started adding these things on like parade grounds. All these are temporary structures that you're seeing on the left.
This is New Mexico. This is not like Rafala or Baghdad. This is New Mexico. You got your military people there, I guess, in the uniform.
Yep, they're regulating traffic, and everybody else is wearing hijabs and whatever Afghan dress is. So you have this just weird mix of soldiers. They had a huge tent there that you could go in and check in, and every single government agency, DHS, CBP, Border Patrol, NSA, CIA, who else? State Department, FBI, Homeland Security investigations. Like there were 50 different government agencies. Every part of DOD was there. And representatives from the Pentagon. And so they're in one of these big tents here where there was just this big kind of command post. So you're just seeing something. I don't know that anybody's ever seen this footage. If you never went to one of these things, you don't know, but it was just crazy. I mean, all these tents were brought up in a period of a couple of days. Those mobile restrooms were called the Cadillacs. So we'd have rapes that would happen in there, or alleged rapes. They're just walking with grocery bags. They're picking up food. They're picking up, clothing. They're doing laundry, which is they have to walk through the dust to go do.
Now you appreciate it. Was Elon on Rogan talking about the money laundering for aid type services. Now
oh my God, the amount of money that must have gone into this place was absolutely insane.
Because I say these people, it's going to sound, you're bringing in foreigners, you set them up on these temporary encampments, you get these refugee displacement agencies that come in here. They're all being funded by the government, either directly or through USAID or through NGOs. That looks like another place, another planet, or at least another country. And you're talking, abuse of women, rape of children, from what I understand. And basically you, as FBI at the time, are in there to investigate crimes that are being perpetrated on this encampment that exists because Biden imported how many people were on that encampment at the time.
There were about 10,000 on that particular location, and another 10,000 at Holloman, where we had a trafficking scenario of a young boy that was he was 17, I think, when we got to him, but they had lied on his paperwork as well and said he was 19, separated from his older brothers by beating them up in either Germany or Qatar. And then they held on to him, and they just would take him and get him drunk and rape him in the bathrooms. I actually ended up getting that guy to his family in Virginia, which was crazy. They'd lost track of him for several months. But all this stuff was just bizarre. I mean, it was the weirdest thing because nobody really knew what the jurisdiction, who has jurisdiction over a bunch of Afghans that don't have any status in this country, that got flown in on military transport and then were put into these huge tents. And so, like I said, every governmental agency is there. Nobody wants to really own that. And so just like on an Indian reservation, whenever there's a major federal crime, you've got NCIS would handle the Navy stuff. You've got Air Force OSI that handles the Air Force. You got Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division, which handles Army stuff. But they generally handle stuff that happens with soldiers or with civilians and not this sort of weird foreign nexus. So we got pulled in there only because who the hell else was going to do it? And every bit about it was bad. Every bit about it was disorganized. And I'll just tell you the craziest part of the story that you were interested in, but I think the broader story is how crazy it was.
Yep.
That female service member rather, she was a enlisted. I think she was either a private first class or maybe she was a specialist. We were convinced she just made it up. That was a completely fabricated story on her end. And there was ample evidence that led us to believe that. And we were actually shut down from doing a more sort of aggressive investigation, which we would normally do, which would have probably proven that she was actually, in fact, lying about these allegations. So the female that the story kicked off, and this is why my congresswoman was so desperate to get information about it, nobody knew what to do with it because she made it up as far as we could tell. She was a black female. It was her first duty station. She didn't want to be in El Paso, Texas, which I don't blame her. It's not really that great, especially if you're like a single black female. It's probably not the place you want to go hang out. El Paso is just, it's like another country in a lot of ways for people who've never been there. It doesn't feel like most of the rest of America if you haven't seen that transition into what it's closer to Mexico. A lot of people dual citizenship or people that cross over and work in Mexico and Juarez and whatnot. So it was real weird. And the story that she said was so inconsistent. And the interviews we did were very aggressive. We went out and grabbed dozens and dozens of men, detained them for hours on end, 12, 15, 24 hours at a time.
This is you that did this.
Yeah, me and my partner and some of the other FBI agents that were down there doing this stuff. So we were directly doing this. And one of the key parts of her story that was impossible to substantiate. First of all, she told us what they were wearing. This is a pitch black. So one of the things about that area of Doña Ana is the county that I used to live in Las Cruces. And then when you cross over the state line, you end up in the Fort Bliss / El Paso area. It is incredibly dark out there, like beautifully dark, minimal light pollution. The desert is excellent they have a lot of observatories. In fact, I used to live right behind a major observatory for the New Mexico State University. And so it's incredibly dark when it gets dark, to the point where on my property, when we had a full moon, I would be able to see a shadow, like a really aggressive moon shadow. And when we had no moon, I could even see star shadows if your eyes were well adjusted. Like you could see the shadow from just the starlight around you. That's how clear the sky was. But it's really freaking dark. And I don't know how else to say it other than I've never been in a fight in the dark where I could tell you the color of the eyes of the people that I was fighting with when I was struggling for my life. And this woman claimed that she could describe their eye color and that half of them were in traditional dress for Afghans and half of them were in modern Western dress, and that they were trying to get her into the trunk of her own vehicle. She had gone to her vehicle in a very, very dark section where there were no cameras. And we investigated that whole area. And then when we get over there, when we're talking to them, the question that nobody could answer was, she apparently managed to fight these men off. And there was like a half dozen of them or more. And she did so by kicking one of them that was closest to her very aggressively in the shin while wearing combat boots, which is, that's a great tactic. Getting a shin kick will change your life. But it also leaves a big mark. If you get thumped with a combat boot in the shin, just, I was in the military. I know a little bit about getting kicked by combat boots in the shin. And so it's not something you walk away with without a mark. And she claimed that she got one to the point where the guy howled and like grabbed his knee and then fell to the ground. And the other guys kind of like lost the fight. And then she got into her vehicle and she drove off and she managed to go up to some friendly soldiers who all, like basically protected her and grabbed her and took her in. And the only question that nobody could answer was the trunk of the car still open when she got there? And everybody looked at us and it seemed to me, it seemed very apparent to all of us doing the interviews at the time that they had kind of all agreed on telling the story because she made this up, and they all, they sent out the APB base wide. You've got the FBI sending 8 agents in to start doing interviews. We've detained probably 12.5 people. We're holding them in detention for 24 plus hours. The Army, whatever they call the base police are grabbing everybody they can that was like even remotely nearby. And we did all the interviews and none of it aligned with the fact pattern. And there was really no way that the stuff she was saying would have made any sense. What we did find out is that she immediately stopped worrying about this because they gave her the transfer to her duty station of choice right after. And then we were not allowed to go interview her again.
Well, and I'm not.
And so that's why the United States Attorney's Office walked away from this case. So people understand it was declined for prosecution because there was no one that we could find that fit the pattern of the aggressors. And the female was transferred out to her preferred location. And it seemed like everybody got what they wanted. And the Army didn't want to be any further embarrassed by a false sexual assault claim.
Well, okay. Two things in response to what you're saying. Like when she says, I can identify the eyes. I mean, I can just take a guess. They're all going to be brown. And I'm not trying to be
She
funny.
said they were blue.
Is there a significant portion of Afghanis that have blue eyes?
Some.
Okay. And then I was going to say the other portion of the medical treatment that the article alleged that she got in the counseling. was a rape kit administered, or did it not? And I don't want to say get that far. Was it not that type of assault?
To our knowledge, there was no rape kit that was administered. We were trying to get basically all this information, but they were very slow because we were dealing with another agency. Now you're dealing with the Department of the Army. They sent out their own interview, or they sent out two unfamiliar female agents from El Paso. I think they may have done both, but they didn't let the people who had done the interviews with all the guys that we had rounded up that fit the description and were in the pattern and were documented as being in the area at the time. So we knew the fact patterns of what these guys claimed and what they said, and they wouldn't let us go and talk to her to try to get the rest of the story. And it just went away. And so the reason why you're not going to get anything out of a FOIA and why nobody wants to talk about it is because they made this really big to-do. It was a big right-wing media push. And look, I'm happy to push against the right when they're wrong, and same thing for the left when they're wrong, which is often. In this case, Fox News blew this out of proportion very quickly. You got this big story where a couple of people wanted to go make some political hay on it. And from being on the ground, physically there doing these interviews, I was convinced that she made it up. As was my partner, as was the rest of the investigators that were involved, that were actually interviewing potential subjects of this particular scenario. So
interesting. I mean,
it changes the game on what that means. It doesn't change what happened on those bases, which was absolutely atrocious. And so this is where it's kind of that gray area. They made up a false claim, or she did. She got what she wanted out of it, not knowing she'd made this huge national hubbub. And the problem is that I think it actually deterred from some of the attention that should have been put on those bases, because the stuff that ended up going on, we're going to be talking about this for years, in so much as what happened in DC the other day and what will continue to happen, because we have an unvetted population of 88,000 or 100,000 Afghans that came to this country, many of whom under false pretense, under bad documentation, and no one told them what the rules were in America. That was maybe the biggest wild thing. When a guy goes and grabs a woman by the hair, drags her into his tent and says, "Now you're my wife," and she's from the city, she's from Kabul or something like that, and he's from some tribal region where it's acceptable to drag a woman to your cave and then now she's your wife. And then the elders from whatever other tribe beat the shit out of that guy because he didn't, do things the way that they do things. And none of that stuff flies in America. And nobody told them, like, hey, by the way, welcome to America. Here's the rules list of what you can and you can't do. That was the weirdest part. Nobody knew they were even breaking a law or where they were or what the terms were. And nobody knew who was even responsible for enforcing those. So that it was an absolute disaster. And I think we're going to eat some of this ugly elephant that the Biden administration left us. And let everyone remember, they did the disastrous withdrawal that happened in August. In September, we had this influx of whatever it was, Operation Allied Rescue or something. And then in October, they did the COVID vaccine mandates to distract and to find out who was not going to be compliant, of which I was a victim of that at the end of the day. And I no longer work for the FBI, I think, because those two things happened at once.
What's interesting is when you play the identity politics game, on the one hand, if it were a bona fide case of assault, sexual assault, whatever, they would want to sweep it under the rug to not embarrass the policy that they've espoused. Now that you mention it, it's a black woman. If they make her look like a false accuser, it's going to look like there's racism against the Afghans. It'll embarrass another demographic, and so make it disappear. And now that you mention it, I don't find much, if anything, in terms of follow-up articles after September 2021.
It disappeared. Here's the other thing that anybody who served in Afghanistan can appreciate. I did not, but my buddy who was my partner on that day is a Green Beret. He's now in the reserves. And he had multiple deployments, as did others that were part of our group. And they said, the story doesn't line up because Afghan men are not going to go and target a darker skinned black woman. That's not a thing that happens there. And so you guys can validate that. I heard that from probably a dozen different people, including soldiers, who were like, none of this actually lines up with reality. Having been recently deployed to Afghanistan and coming back, he's like, that woman was in the least amount of sexual assault danger of anything. And we very aggressively pursued the interviews. Again, we grabbed way more people than would be appropriate in any other kind of investigation, because we're on a captive base with people who have unknown sort of access to civil liberties, and it was dark, and they don't have anything else to do. They don't know what else to, like, we could theoretically deport them for no reason at all. And so they all were compliant, and everybody who was in the area came in, and we heard essentially every little group of males. They were a couple of groups of 5 males here, and they were playing soccer, and there's 5 males here, and they were walking around listening to a Bluetooth speaker, and they were 5 males over here, and they were going to the toilet together and doing whatever they do. And so all these different groups, they all corroborated the stories of the others without ever being in the same place to coordinate their stories. And the woman's story was the only one that stood out. And again, at the end of the day, nobody could remember why the trunk was closed when she got there, which I'll just tell you, in a fight for your life, if you're jumping into the car, the last thing I'm worried about is whether or not the trunk of the car is shut down before I get in the car and drive off.
The only thing I can say is maybe she accelerated so fast the trunk itself closed.
It's just not possible.
And I presume nobody had any bruises on their shins. Your first question is
correct. Every single person did bare shin interviews. Like, we checked them all out, and we'd listen to their story first, and then we'd ask them to show us shins. And she apparently had gotten a grip on somebody else in another way. And so we were looking for physical markings, claw marks of neck and so on. And there was a couple of parts of her story. All of it lined up to be fraudulent.
Well, let's even say
I felt very confident by not pursuing it any further, as did the United States Attorney's Office, who didn't want anything to do with this because they were just like, this is garbage.
But true or not, the question would be, why would Brianna not get any response or be given the being stonewalled on her FOIA request? Now, why would this administration either want to protect on the one hand?
Administration, you and I keep telling you this, and anybody who has any sense understands this. The guys who are at the top of the FBI do not run the FBI. The FBI is run middle out. It's run by the middle management. It's run by the senior management that's been there for several decades. And it's my instinct. And look, I have a lot of dislike for what Kash Patel's done, mostly because it's personal animosity that he's lied to me. He's lied to my friends. He owes my friends back pay to the tune of like $250,000, one of them $500,000, the other $750,000, and they haven't paid a penny on it. They're screwing over the whistleblowers regularly, myself included. I told him, I was like, I don't ever want to come work for you again, but can you just settle my lawsuit? Because we've got a COVID lawsuit. They actually fired a guy. This is unrelated, but kind of related, I guess. They fired a guy named Spencer Evans. Do you remember that story? They fired 5 guys. It was the pilot from the jet. There was a guy named Walter Gardena who was working on all the Trump cases. They fired Stephen Jensen, who was in charge of the Washington field office, Brian Driscoll, who was the former acting director, and he was in charge of SERG. And then lastly was this guy, Spencer Evans, who was out of Las Vegas. They fired all of them the same day. They fired Spencer Evans for the exact reason that I have sued the Bureau. They basically said that he was an inappropriate enforcer of COVID policies, and he did so in violation of FBI policy and law. We have a lawsuit that basically is the exact reason that they terminated his employment, and he's named as the person who did the things that we said. They fired him for the things that we said he did, and they're fighting our lawsuit tooth and nail. It's the same organization. It's always been.
And not to give Kash a pass, but if the argument is that it's run from the middle up, these types of things are the things that Kash could sign off on in a heartbeat if he decided to. But if it's being run from the middle up, then presumably...
I would say he doesn't know. This is the other thing. I listen to these guys really carefully. I've listened to Bongino talk on Fox. I've listened to him talk in the other interviews. And they always say, we've been fully briefed on these files. And he'll go in front of Congress, Kash Patel will, and he'll say, I think Massey asked him directly, have you actually seen these files? And he was like, well, some of them. I don't think they know how to use the FBI's file system. And it's not intuitive. It's a crappy government system. It's called Sentinel. I used it for years. To become a power user of Sentinel probably takes you a couple of years. And I am of significantly above average intelligence, and I still struggle with it because it's just not intuitive. It's a badly designed system. And if you're not spending your day digging through the minutia of a case, you're not going to know where all the Epstein files are, what was in every serial. You're going to wait on someone to brief you, but these are the same people that you spent years saying were liars. So everything they've done is illogical. That's why they don't get the pass, is because you didn't bring in people who could have actually done it. And some of my friends would have been happy to be, and some of the folks that were in the Bureau that are honest operators would have come in from other places. They were, they didn't have whistleblower problems and they didn't have issues with the COVID vax that I did, but they're still honest human beings. They basically went with the folks that were in the Hoover building that were recommended to them. And I think they got snowed right away because look, nobody wants to work in a workplace where you're the jerk and everybody hates you. Imagine somebody comes up to you, you start a new job and you said you were going to tear up the whole shop. And the person runs up to you and just goes, David, thank God you're here. Things have been so out of control for the last couple of years. You're a godsend. We just need you to be here. And anything you need, I'm your guy. Like, I'm going to help you out. Just tell me what you want. And like, you can rely on me. You can count on me. Just really glad that you made it through the confirmation process. And that person did it because they wanted to be able to snow you. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're more likely to believe that than not. It seems plausible. Like, you don't think that these people are out there covering their asses from all the things they did. So the reason they didn't give Breonna Morello the information, part of it is it's the same FBI. And the second thing that people have to really understand, and it's critical, we're talking about an organization that you think of as being a law enforcement agency. And the FBI thinks of itself as an intelligence agency. So you had a little playful moment a couple times with Julie Kelly talking about the CIA. Like, now we believe the things that the CIA says about the CIA, right? The question is, do you really think that the FBI is in the business of giving you transparent information? They're not. And they don't think they owe it to you because they're part of the intelligence community. And intelligence agencies, by definition, hoard intel, and they don't share it if they don't have to, because intel is the source of the power. And so, this was not one of those things that was a great victory. It wasn't a great loss either. I think we did a competent and capable investigation. We got a declination letter from a United States attorney, which is a very common move. They say they declined to prosecute. That means the case is dead. There's no reason to investigate it any further.
Who got that? Has that declination letter ever been made public?
No, and they're not. They just go into it's called a C4 administrative closing. It goes in, it's a case filing or a case closing code that goes in on the administrative end for the FBI. You open an investigation with what's called an EC, or an electronic communication. Here's the probable cause, or here's the allegation or information there's a federal crime, and this is what we're looking into, and this is the scope and the depth of what we're going to do. And then the closing EC is essentially, we've exhausted all logical investigative steps. The United States Attorney's Office concurs that they're not interested in prosecution. There's no further investigative steps that are warranted at this time. Administrative closing recommended, and then it's done. And that's it.